Greetings. This video covers a guide to interpretive writing using structure to convey analysis in formal writing. This video has been designed for Year 9 students, and as a result you might notice as we're writing that there are some sections that aren't necessarily perfect. The focus of this video, however, is all about structure, and that's what we're really going to be talking about. So as long as you've got the foundational structure right, then you are certainly meeting the expectations of the skill that we're looking to develop in this piece. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at the text Deadly Unna. This is a very commonly covered text, particularly in the Year 9 curriculum. However, if you're studying a different text, you can apply the same principles that we're talking about here to that text as well. It's more about the structure than it is about the content. Now, as a Year 9 student, you've likely come across TEEL structure. I know that my students spent the first part of the year writing persuasive paragraphs, and for this reason they had to understand the relationship of the topic sentence, elaboration, evidence, and linking statement sections. When we're interpreting something, however, we add another E to this structure, and this is a new skill that we're looking to develop. The next E that we're going to add comes after the evidence, and we call it the effect. So you can see that there's actually 5 sections to the structure that we're using when we're doing an interpretive piece: the topic sentence, the elaboration, the evidence, the effect, and the linking statement. Let's look at these in a little bit more detail. The topic sentence describes what the aim of the paragraph is and what does it seek to explain. We should always give hints as to the approach that we're looking to take to answer a particular question. When we talk about the topic sentence, the important thing to remember is that after reading that single sentence, the reader should have a complete understanding of what the paragraph is going to be about. For the elaboration, it says, in what format does the text convey this information? And here we're particularly talking about techniques, and what is the author looking to achieve? This is a really important step in terms of clarifying the content of what you're going to explain and setting the context of how it actually is going to progress. The evidence is where we actually start to bring evidence from the book, and in this case we are talking about a book analysis, but it could just as easily be a film or a graphic novel or a poem or anything along this line. A really important thing to differentiate here is the fact that in the topic sentence and the elaboration, we don't really mention what happens within the text or within the novel. We save that for our evidence. The effect is the new section that we're looking at today. How does this content have an impact on the reader, and what can we interpret based on what is written? When we're talking about doing an interpretive piece, one of the key things to show the person who's marking your work is what you think about what's happened in the text. It's all well and good to talk about what happened in the text or to talk about particular characters, but the most important thing when it comes to learning, and this goes right across life, is what lessons you can take from it that actually teach you something about life. So we're really going to explore this in our examples to follow. The linking statement, of course, discusses how the discussion of this paragraph is ultimately relevant to what the question was asking for. And in this case, you always want to make sure that you're including some keywords from the question to show that relationship between your analysis and the prompt. And when we say the prompt, we're really talking about the question. Now, in order to break this down in terms of the process, I want to talk to you about a particular model. This is a model that I developed in order to teach students about the structure of a paragraph and the formation of a clear point. It uses 3 circles, and I affectionately call this the Master's Wheel, which is actually named after something in the book Zorro, for anyone who's interested. As you can see, there's 3 different circles in the wheel, and each circle contains a different word. I want you to think about the fact that the bigger the circle, the more important the content. So when we're talking about the theme, we can see that this is in the biggest circle, because when we're doing an analysis, talking about themes is the most important thing. The next most important thing is talking about techniques. And of course, showing an understanding of techniques is a really important element of analysis because it shows that you understand how somebody is communicating their ideas to you. In the middle, we've got the content, and the content is what we would call the least important thing. At the end of the day, the person who's marking your essay has probably already read the book. So going on and on and on about what happens in the book probably isn't demonstrating any particular skills. It is still important, however, and that's why it's part of the wheel. To break this down a little bit more, let's look at the other quadrant. As you can see, if we change the language a bit, we can see that the most important thing, or the element in the biggest circle, is the why. Why was this text created? Why did the author write and create this? What were they trying to say? What were they trying to teach us? That's what we mean when we're talking about theme. For the second circle, we're really focusing on how. How did the author achieve this? How were they able to get their message across? What did they do to actually teach us? And as you can see, that's related to the use of techniques. In the middle circle, we're looking at the what. What was it in the book that actually gives evidence of this? What was it that the author specifically did that allowed them to communicate their theme? So as you can see, there's a really clear relationship of these three elements, and a good analysis shows that relationship. Now let's look at the final quadrant, which puts it into the context of writing. As you can see here, the theme is linked to the topic sentence, because when we start a paragraph, the most important thing is that we're covering this question of why. Why did the author do this? We always start our paragraph with a topic sentence, and therefore we always start by identifying a theme. The elaboration covers the technique. It's the second most important thing in this case. So for our second sentence, when we're writing a paragraph, we always need to list the how and mention specific techniques. For the evidence section, which is the third element of our TEEL structure, that's where we deal with the content, what actually happened in the book. And remember, we try to keep these areas distinct and separate. So let's put them into a practical setting. A question that you might receive in an exam or a practice question, and I know that this is a question I gave to my Year 9 class, would be something like this. Blackie's fear of becoming a gutless wonder is motivated not only by the social pressure of the town, but also because of his relationship with his father. Explain why this is so. Now, this could be put together as an essay question, or it could be put together as a critical response, which means that you're really only looking to write a single paragraph. However, no matter what the case, when we're talking about any kind of analysis, we're going to use the same model. So let's break it down. The most important step when looking at a question of this type is to determine what it is you're actually being asked to look at. Now, you remember the fact that an analysis contains a theme, techniques, and content. If we have a look at the language of this, Blackie's fear of becoming a gutless wonder, the social pressure of town, his relationship with his father. What are we really talking about here? Are we talking about themes? I would suggest no. It doesn't seem to say anything about particular themes. Is there any talk about specific techniques? Do we see any words like characterization or setting or symbolism? I don't think we do. In fact, most of the language here seems to be related around content. So if we take this idea of Blackie's fear of being a gutless wonder, or the term gutless wonder, Blackie's the social pressure on Blackie, and also Blackie's relationship with his father, and we apply them to the master's wheel, we can see that actually all of those prompts exist in the centre circle. They're all related to content. So our goal, therefore, in order to put together an analysis, is to fill in the other two circles and link it all together. Now, you notice in this question it talks a lot about Blackie, Blackie's fear, Blackie's relationship with his father, everything along that line. We get a real sense from this that Blackie is a really key part in whatever message is actually trying to be communicated here. Whenever a character is the central focus of a message, We refer to this as the technique of characterization. So for our second circle, we can suggest that the technique that the author is using to convey this information or this message that they're trying to say is all related to characterization. So that's the technique we're going to talk about. Now we need to think about the theme. What lesson do we think is actually trying to be taught to us based on this? Blackie doesn't want to be a gutless wonder. He's afraid of what other people are going to think about him. And he's also got this damaged relationship with his father, all because of this social pressure. I'd suggest that that word, or that term, social pressure, is a really important element to look at. And I'm going to suggest, and you might have a slightly different idea about this, but it just goes to say there's no wrong answers, but I'm going to suggest that the theme we're talking about here is whether or not we should conform to social pressure, because that's really what we're looking at with Blackie. So now that we've got this outline, we can start to put together our paragraph. So if conforming to social pressure is the theme, we remember from the previous slide that the topic sentence needs to outline that theme. So let's have a look about how we would put that together. So the topic sentence, we need to mention the theme, social pressure. I've put it together quite simply. One of the themes in Philip Gwynne's Deadly Unna is conforming to social pressure. I haven't really put in any bells and whistles. I've been really clear. And as we know, an effective topic sentence highlights what the theme of discussion is going to be. And I've done exactly that. Let's move on to the elaboration. Now the elaboration has to talk about the technique. So the most important thing in this is that I identify how the author is conveying their theme. My example reads, the author uses the technique of characterization to demonstrate how individuals' actions can be influenced by the perspectives and opinions of those around them. Now notice not only did I say the technique of characterization, which means I've ticked the box of an effective elaboration, but I also went further to explain exactly what I meant by that and what the author was trying to achieve. That's a really important step with the elaboration. Notice at this point I haven't mentioned Blackie, I haven't mentioned the term gutless wonder, and I haven't mentioned his relationship with his father. All of that comes in to the evidence section, where I'm actually going to talk about what happens in the book to explain this message. So, in the evidence, it was really important that I talked about gutless wonder, and it was important that I talked about Blackie, because he's the character that we're really focusing on as the person who's conveying this message. The text reads, in the text, the character of Blackie lives in fear of being labelled a gutless wonder, which is the worst thing you can be called in town. Now notice I've taken a direct quote out of the book, and that's going to get me an extra tick or an extra mark from my assessor. Blackie perceives this label to be condemning, and so is willing to place his own safety at risk in facing the thumper, rather than be labelled as a coward. Blackie also associates his broken relationship with his father as the result of being a gutless wonder, and this belief largely dominates his thoughts and actions as a result. What I'm really looking to illustrate here is the fact that in the book, this idea of conforming or changing your actions because of the pressure that's been put on you by others is a key theme. And what I've really done in my evidence is I've shown that. I've shown the fact that Blackie is willing to put his safety at risk by being charged and possibly injured by the thumper, rather than being called a coward. In this case, his actions have been determined by the social pressure. We can also see that his relationship with his father is dominated by this belief, and this fear that he has with his father is really essential to his label as a gutless wonder. So we can see again there's a really clear relationship between his actions and his belief, or the pressure that's put on him, in this case by his father. So that's what we've really tried to illustrate in our evidence, and it's all stuff from the book. So now we go on to our effect section. And here we're talking about what does this teach us about our own lives. To put things in context, if you said, for example, this teaches us that if we live in Port Victoria and we happen to be on a football team, where we have to make a choice about being crushed by someone called the thumper, we should ... I'd suggest you're being way too specific, because part of what makes a good effect is actually being broad enough so that the lesson can apply anywhere. Let's read. For the reader, this content teaches us that the perspectives of others and the pressures that are placed on us through society can have a negative influence in our lives. I think there's a bit of a typo there. Gwyn illustrates that we should be mindful of the pressures of our own surroundings and to ignore the perspectives of people who mean us harm. Now, hopefully you can start to see the link in this effect and the idea that this could actually apply to any person in any stage of life. This could apply to an adult who's going for a particular job and feels like people are pressuring them, to ignore that pressure. It could be a child, a reception student who feels like they're being pressured to play chasey at recess even though they don't want to, and as a result they trip over and hurt themselves. It could apply to anyone. It's broad enough that the lesson shows critical thinking about life, and that's a real skill to develop. Lastly, and I've put this together fairly briefly, is our linking statement, and this is where we're putting this together to relate it to the goal of our discussion. I've written, here we've illustrated how the author has used techniques within a text to demonstrate an intended message. And really that was the goal of what the question was trying to get us to write. So that's a good kind of clear, almost generic linking statement that you could use at the end. Let's put all of these sections together and look at the paragraph that we've created as a result. One of the themes in Philip Gwyn's Deadly Unna is conforming to social pressure. The author uses the technique of characterization to demonstrate how individuals' actions can be influenced by the perspectives and opinions of those around them. In the text, the character of Blackie lives in fear of being labelled a gutless wonder, which is the worst thing you can be called in town. Blackie perceives this label to be condemning and so is willing to place his own safety at risk in facing the thumper rather than be labelled as a coward. Blackie also associates his broken relationship with his father as the result of being a gutless wonder, and this belief largely dominates his thoughts and actions as a result. For the reader, this content teaches us that the perspectives of others and the pressures that are placed on us through society can have a negative influence in life. Gwyn illustrates that we should be mindful of the pressures of our own surroundings and to ignore the perspectives of people who mean us harm. Here, we have illustrated how the author has used techniques within a text to demonstrate an intended message. So hopefully you can see the way that everything in that particular paragraph links together. Now let me reinforce this by looking at another paragraph on a different topic. In this case, we're looking at the topic of racism, and we can see here it says one of the key themes in Philip Gwyn's Deadly Unna is racism. The author uses the setting of the port to represent how people from different racial backgrounds can be treated with prejudice. In the text, so now I'm up to my evidence section, the local bar is divided into two sections, with the black bar reserved solely for Aboriginal patrons. This physical barrier symbolises the town's perceptions of Aboriginal people, or Nungas as they are called, as different from white Australians. Gwyn uses this setting as a representation of how society can separate and show prejudice to people based solely on their racial background. This impacts the reader by illustrating the negative impact humans can create by isolating and stereotyping individuals, as the text goes on to show that the Nungas have a rich and caring culture that few in the port are able to experience. Here we can see how Gwyn has included the theme of racism within his text as a means of illustrating the ignorance that society can create should it choose to neglect human rights. Now in this case we're looking at a higher level of paragraph. The language is more sophisticated and the point is a little bit more polished, but the structure is all the same. If we look at the first sentence, what did they say? Well, they highlighted that the theme they were going to discuss was racism, and that is our topic sentence. In the second sentence, they said the author uses setting, and of course setting is a technique, so that means that they've got a clear elaboration. They then talked about specifically what was in the text, and all of this blue section here justifies that racism and talks about how the setting actually conveys the message. They then talked about what they learned from it on a broad scale. And this is the purple section, where they talked about what the reader could learn and how we could actually perceive our own lives based on this content. And finally, we've got a really clear linking statement that draws it all together. Hopefully this video has given you an impression about what an interpretive paragraph looks like and the steps that you can follow to create one. Your piece of writing might not be perfect, and it does take practice, but if you follow these steps, you use the master's wheel, and you make sure that you've got something down for each of the 5 sections of TEEL, you're definitely taking a step in the right direction, and that's the most important.